Hello, I thought I would make a little video today because I had the realization that I have not finished a song since maybe last summer, and it's not for lack of trying. I definitely have sat down with the guitar and tried to get something out, but I just haven't really felt inspired. I have written quite a few snippets of songs, but I haven't gotten anything concrete, and I thought I would share some tips on how to get out of a songwriting slump. So feel free to write a song using some of these methods and let me know how you get on. They're just little tricks that I use when I'm a bit stuck, and I thought I would kind of make this an exercise and force myself to write something. So my tip number one is to try writing on a different instrument. I find that I write quite a lot of my rocky songs on piano because it means I can then build them up, and also I'm better at piano, so I know it a lot better and I kind of can play it a lot more fluently than guitar. But because I don't know guitar as well, it means that I experiment a lot more because I'm not beholden to the keys and the chord shapes that I know on piano, because I can just look at piano and go, oh, that's an E, that's a C, and I don't think as creatively, I just think technically. So by writing on guitar, it's a lot more freeing in a weird sense, even though I can play it less well. I do write a lot of songs on guitar, but mostly those songs are in a completely different genre. They're usually quite singer-songwriter-y songs. I feel even if it's an instrument that you barely play, say you don't play piano, but you have access to one, just looking up some simple chords where they show you where your fingers go so you don't have to read music or anything, you can then just play around by ear with what you think sounds nice, because you're not beholden to falling into chord progressions that you already know because you know theory on a certain instrument. I think the most interesting songs I've written have been ones I've written on guitar because I've just played a random chord and it sounded really nice, but it's not something I necessarily would have found on piano. My hands just naturally gravitate to the chords that I know fit together, because in other songs that I've played, you have a lot of standard chord progressions. And this doesn't even have to be just an instrument. You could record directly into a DAW, which, something like Logic or GarageBand even, if you're kind of new to songwriting or music production. You don't need to have many chops to use something like GarageBand. You could literally just record in your own voice. You could create a song that's purely a cappella. I think experimenting with different instruments and textures can really help with inspiration because you're not stuck to the same medium that you're always writing with. I've definitely written some really interesting songs using completely random things that weren't even instruments. For my masters, I had to record a load of songs and then produce them, but one of them was an experimental song, and for that song I recorded the sound of bin lids and chains on a swing, and I put them together into drum sounds. Obviously that's more of a production side of things, but genuinely anything can be an instrument, and you've got your voice. So even if it's just being used as percussion or something, it's really interesting to experiment with different sounds. For example, using random samples of sounds that you've made and recorded and stacking them or ordering them into a drum kit or a bass or something. Obviously that might be a bit more advanced, but even if it's an instrument that you're not very good at, if anything, I think that helps. Step number two is, if you have an instrument that can be put in a different tuning, to try random different tunings. I basically used to just randomly tune my guitar to a different tuning. I didn't even know if it was a standard tuning. These days I kind of look it up sometimes, but honestly sometimes I've been playing a chord and just gone, oh, that note would be easier to play if I just tuned it down, and then that's how I've discovered new tunings. Because I didn't have classical lessons on guitar, I played about with it, and it actually made me be more creative in some ways in terms of writing. So my tip number two for getting out of a songwriting slump is to use a different tuning. And if you're using an instrument like the piano, this could translate to picking a different key that you've never written in before. And if you have written in every key, very impressive for one, because I tend to stay to keys that have the easiest accidentals in them, or the most minimal accidentals, or all accidentals, so it's a lot easier. But in that vein, you could potentially write in two keys. For example, in the verse, you could be in one key and then transition to a different key in the chorus. Maybe like a minor third down or a major third down, depending on what the vibe of the song ends up being, if you haven't tried that before. There's a really good song by Dolores O'Riordan where she switches from the minor key to the major key, and it just suddenly brings in this breath of fresh air when you get to the chorus. But yeah, I've always found playing around with different tunings or forcing myself to write in a key that is kind of far away from what I would usually write in, I find that it is a bit of a challenge. Trying to find chords that work can take a while, but I've always found that I end up with something really cool because the harmonies are all completely different, obviously because all the strings are tuned to different notes than standard. So when you hold standard positions, or work out which positions work in a different tuning, you can get some really beautiful chords that may have been a bit more complicated to play in standard. So my tip number three, which is definitely something I struggle with, is to start with a different lyric writing prompt. So I usually write songs from my own experience, but again, when I was doing my masters and I had to write about 20 songs in quite a short period of time. I had to come up with inspiration that couldn't just come from my own life stories, because I'd used quite a lot of those up. I had to look elsewhere to get inspiration. Otherwise, if I was just using my own experiences, I'd have bled myself dry and I'd have just been rehashing the same sort of feelings, because I'd obviously written a lot of songs about similar topics, and I really wanted to try something that seemed completely different from all the songs I was writing about my own experiences. And also sometimes I just get bored of myself. Like, I don't want to be that introspective all the time. Sometimes I just want to write a song, or I just want to be creative but not have to feel all these emotions all over again from things that have happened in my life. So when I was doing this masters, I took inspiration from a dream that someone had told me they had, and this was a really interesting thing to explore, because obviously dreams are crazy sometimes. I think that world is a really good place to take inspiration from, because I've written down quite a few of my dreams, and my friends have heard about them. I'm sure they do not need me to rehash them here, so I won't. But dreams can often have quite intense emotions. I've definitely had some pretty existential dreams, which I could use as writing material. Obviously, you don't have to use a dream. You could use a book that really inspires you. For example, Wuthering Heights by Kate Bush. She caught the end of an adaptation of Wuthering Heights and then read the book and wrote this beautiful song about it. So it doesn't just have to be from personal experiences. I didn't even think about trying to find inspiration from anything other than things that happened to me until I was forced to write a load of songs that needed substance. I basically just always wrote from my own experiences. Obviously they were kind of mixed and matched, but I realised I didn't have to just be bearing my soul the whole time. I could also make things up. You can too just write your own story and make that a song. So that's how I flip things on their head sometimes. I think of a book, a film, a dream, a place that I've been that was particularly evocative. Even just people you pass in the street. Maybe you see someone who looks really cool. Maybe you make up a little narrative about them, write a song about that. I know it sounds so simple, but I genuinely hadn't thought that I could write about things other than literally just experiences I'd had. This one has definitely worked for me. So step number 4 is to start writing the song the opposite way round than you would usually write a song. So what I mean by that is, for example, I would usually write the chords and melody first and then kind of fill in lyrics afterward. I'd maybe have a few lyrics floating in my head that I wanted to use, but most of the time I'll sit down with the guitar, strum out a chord pattern, and find a vague melody that I like. And once I've got a structure on the chords and the melody, I'll sit down and write the full lyrics. So as an exercise to kind of shake this up, especially if I'm not feeling a lot of inspiration, I'll write out a set of lyrics first and then try and fit them into a chord progression that I then come up with. So basically flipping round what you do first. And obviously if you write both at the same time, maybe just try doing one at a time. Maybe that's the way that you would spin it if you kind of write everything all off the cuff together. But for me, having written out some lyrics and then trying to fit that into a chord progression and a melody that comes later is the way that I've been able to get some more inspiration before. Because obviously if I'm always going in with the same plan of attack, I'm not necessarily going to feel inspired because I just use the same technique all the time. So it can be very helpful flipping that around and trying to come up with something in the opposite way than you usually would. So my last tip is so simple, but it is finish a song. Now, obviously that sounds easier said than done, but I more mean by this that if you've used all these techniques and some of them have managed to help you, finish the song. Because I have so many unfinished songs and I don't need any more unfinished songs. The problem is I usually end up not loving the songs that I write. So about 1 in 100 of them become songs, but even just finishing a song that I dislike, I still have then finished a song. And if I finish a song, then I feel like I can move on to something else. And even if I don't end up using that finished song, I still have a finished song, which kind of tricks your brain into going, oh, well, we finished that, let's start on something new. And maybe the new thing will give me inspiration because I've got the endorphins from having finished something. Because if you've got a load of half-finished projects, your brain's still chewing over all of those, but it's not actually had any completion. By finishing it, at least I have a finished song. And I don't have to love it. Hey, you could sell it to someone else. Someone might love the song that you've finished that you don't want. But the reason why I think this is important is because if it's been a long time since you have finished a song, it's going to tell you that you can finish a song. Take a shot every time Emily says finish a song. But sometimes it is that confidence of, oh, I haven't finished anything in ages, and you start feeling really insecure as to whether you even can. But a lot of the time you can finish it, you just don't love it, and that's why you keep leaving things unfinished. So hopefully just by forcing your way through it, even if it's not your best work, it helps give you a bit of positive reinforcement that you can finish something. And then again, you might move on to something that you then really love because you know you can finish a song and you can still write. You still have that capability, which you do. I mean, writing songs is so specific to each person, and we all use different things for inspiration. And obviously, I can say all of these tips as much as I want, but I think these are quite useful as just an exercise to force you to write something, not necessarily as something to make your next big hit. But I hope you enjoyed these tips. I hope they were even remotely useful. I will be using them because I need to write a song, and I might make that another video. But thank you so much for watching. I hope any of this has been useful, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!